my camera around. Okay, so literally I'll be able to turn my camera around. Well, I can't turn it around. I guess you have to do it.
Let me see.
And they can actually have it. So I'll be there in about a couple of minutes. So we can definitely talk and until we get there.
So how so you were born and raised there?
Born and raised there. I went to school here.
Okay.
And you know, grew up here and walked the streets.
Wow.
Been on Greenwood, you know, all my entire life. Went through Tulsa public schools and all of that.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is, you know, it's our culture, it's our history. So it's a very, you know, it's a very diverse history in terms. Oklahoma is pretty interesting. It has, you know, African Americans for the most part, you know, actually came here in two different sects. Number one, they came with the Native Americans, and number two, they also migrated here after slavery.
Okay.
Some came after slavery, some came, but others came when the Native Americans had actually had some level of slaves, and they were called freedmen. So there are a lot of African Americans that appear to be African American, but they actually belong to one of the 5 civilized tribes.
You know, I have heard that. I've heard that term before, the freedmen. Because wasn't there a bank also that originated in Tulsa, the Freedmen Bank?
Yeah, there was Freedmen banks, but I grew up with all of that. You know, we had significant amount of African American business ownership that really was around really up until the 80s, where you didn't see that level of business ownership. So I always worked in Black businesses, you know, with Black business owners, and always participated in activities that were African American centered, and you know, just all of this is, you know, just a part of, you know, what we believe to be, you know, our culture. So yeah, so, and Greenwood was a greater part of that too, even though it was burnt down. It was also a part of where we grew up. It was always the more traditional, more older area. Okay. Where people would go and eat good barbecues, where the, you know, barbershops were, the hair salons and all of that. And they were older buildings. And so unlike the East Coast, like Pennsylvania and New York and places like that, there's not a great value on holding older property. So they tear down a whole heck of a lot of stuff. So over the years, you will see that there's been, you know, some significant changes to the community. So I'm on Greenwood now. Wow. So, yeah, so we're here. I wish I could turn this camera around so that you could see it.
I was gonna say there.
Yeah.
Oh, you know where it is? Okay. So if you look up in the top left corner, if you tap the screen, there should be.
I see it.
Yeah, if you click on the little camera, hit that, and it should turn it around.
Okay, then. So
there it is.
There it is, right there. So you can see the skyline. So it was an amazing area, but it was also extremely segregated area as well. So I'm going to take you to some of the sites that that we've actually seen during the time. So my family always have a family reunion here. That's our skyline there. We always have a family reunion here. And since I've left, they've built several colleges in this area here. And this is John Hope Franklin Boulevard. I'll show you some signs later. Okay. But there was quite a few things going on. The bulk of the business community is up in this area here. And gonna try to take you over here. But it was pretty fabulous growing up. We just never really, knew that all of this was going on. So this is very new to have this kind of attention drawn upon us. But there's also some other things going on too. That's where we go last night.
So what about when you were growing up? Did anybody in your family, were they around, even if they were a baby during that time, 1921, during that year, that time, this experience when it happened that you talk about, or they may have known people?
Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes, and it's more than we know. We actually know more now than because of this, because they never talked about it.
Right.
So so they never really talked about, the history. Let's see who's gonna let me bark here. They never really talked about it. Okay. Hi. So they never really talked about the history growing up, and we never learned it in the schools, right? And that was the sad part. And so it was actually survivors that we knew that we never really knew anything about.
Wow.
So we actually went through the school system. Can you still hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay. I can. There you go. It switched off my camera here.
Okay.
It was history that we never knew about. And I didn't really learn it until I went to college and all of that. So I'm walking toward, some of the sites that we've seen. This is the Greenwood Culture Center.
Okay.
Over here.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what could we usually find in there? Is that considered like a museum? And it has
it's considered a museum of the culture of Greenwood.
Okay.
But the significant thing I'm going to show is the church that is famously shown.
Yes.
In all the videos. And then I will show you the wall where they show, which is very powerful to see all the businesses that were lost.
Wow.
And again, the answer is yes. But remember, when I grew up, they never talked about this. So the history we're learning now is recent history to us, but now we're knowing that we had parents, grandparents, even my family were involved, and descendants. So pretty much anyone who's in Tulsa that have at least 3 generations were possibly massacres. So that is the Vernon AME Church right there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the church that's famously shown. One of the very few structures that are still alive on this street.
Wow.
And so this street kind of curves around. And so there's a lot of activity going on. Some of these buildings that I'm going to show you down here, they were actually here when I was growing up. They've just been redone.
Okay.
So it's raining here in Tulsa, but this is the important thing is if it doesn't tell you anything, this history was lost to us. It was erased literally from the history books. It was erased from Tulsa history. It was taken out of all the newspapers. No archives exist of all of the things that happened with that. Only some of the black papers covered it, but none of the mainstream papers covered the systemic practice of this. So therefore, the people that caused this or were involved with this are no longer alive, but they also were never held accountable for it. So, yeah. So this is in front of the Vernon AME Church.
Wow.
Just a plaque here. But that's the famous church that you see on fire.
Yeah.
And all through the years that it's been here, we would go there and get our shots and everything and never knew the historical significance of it.
Right.
So
I was going to ask, do you see, you know, especially in your experience, and as you've learned even more about your own history, our history, but specifically your own history in Tulsa, do you notice over the years that that has happened to a lot of our history, that it's whitewashed or it's erased? And have you seen that be the experience?
Oh, absolutely. All history is whitewashed. That's why it's so important that that's actually the commerce area down there. And I'm going to turn around because it's a little crowded.
Okay.
Yep. The significance of understanding and learning your history is so important, and maintaining it. And I think with African Americans, for the most part, the history is so traumatic that we don't want to pass that trauma on to our children or our grandchildren. You know, we live with this seed of hope, you know, holding on to our religion and the fact that people will change over time. And sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's important for us to do that. We can definitely make the schools accountable for doing that. But even still, if we're not on the school board, if we're not in local office, we can't even control how much of that is even told, right?
Yeah.
So
that's true.
The important thing is that we have to be held accountable. And for those who shared the story, which I will tell you is very, very few people shared the story. Very few people, if any at all. And of course, many of the survivors would have been old to us, right?
Yeah, right.
At that time. So they didn't really talk about it. And they were probably children then. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So
that's true.
They possibly were children. They probably didn't have a major understanding of it. And like my family actually went to Taft, Oklahoma after it happened. I never knew that.
Oh.
So, yeah. So interesting enough, this is the wall memorial.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So, and they went and lived their own lives and, you know, had rural farms and grew things and were extremely self-sufficient. So.
Wow.
So that is the, I don't know if you can actually see that. Or,
I can, yes.
Okay. So that's the wall, and talks about the commercial destruction and just all the businesses that were impacted by the systemic practice of discrimination. We were already segregated, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't enough. And that's the important thing we have to realize too. It's a desire to, hold on just 1 second.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Hi. Nehemiah, how are you? Good. I've got to show you on camera here. This is Nehemiah Frank. He is the new publisher of Black Wall Street. How are you doing, Myneca Ojo? It's nice to meet you. Pennsylvania. Yes. Yes. So.
Wow.
Okay, I want to give you a hug too. Oh, love you. All the way I see you. Hold on just a second, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I've got to get a picture of you. Yeah, we get it with you. And I've been talking you up like crazy too.
Hold on. I always get it with everybody.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think
it's finally.
So I've been talking. It's nice to meet you too. Yeah. And so I've been talking to you up to all my friends about what you're doing. And so you can probably get a call from someone by the name of Tracy Powell.
Okay, yeah.
And did you see that Joy Reid mentioned you on?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you keep doing the work you're doing. I'm such a fan. I am such a fan.
Well, thank you for your strength.
Okay, then.
And standing up to injustices.
Well, thank you.
Like, it's crazy, like how we're all spread out across the country. We're like,
yes, exactly.
Give you a hand in anything.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Okay, I'll be in touch. Okay, take care. Sorry about that. Hold on.
Oh no, that was perfect.
I had to,
like
I
what
had to
perfect
stop
timing.
him in his car, girl.
Listen,
you'll be hearing about him.
I can't wait. Like that's what I love to see. Like just and you know what? It's funny because I was just about to ask you, how do we as a people, as Black people, how do we stay encouraged? Yes, there's been so many that have happened and continue to happen as far as trauma to our community. How do we stay encouraged to share these stories so that our, the generations are aware? Because I know I didn't learn about this in school.
Right.
And it took me to become an adult to have interest in it. So how do we stay encouraged, and how important is it for us to continue these messages?
Well, of course, it's definitely encouraged. And really how we start doing that is really telling our history. I'm going to show you one more thing while I talk.
Okay.
Just telling our history from the perspective of our own families, even within our families. And I'll give you an example. Bye-bye. We'll see you. I'll give you an example. One of the examples I'll give you is my own family. Like my sister's 11 years younger than me.
Okay.
Right. And so her perspective on the family is very different. So even just telling stories about your mom and your dad and what they were like, and the grandparents or the great grandparents that you may have met that they've never met. That's how you begin the storytelling, just even from your own family. Another thing too, because we really don't have that, because, especially in the southern part of the country, it's extremely segregated and it's extremely traumatic. Some of the experiences that we had that never shared, but definitely I would encourage everyone to get an ancestry.com account and actually start looking at documenting, their history from the perspective of, their own, lineage. And so there are documents that you can find. For instance, do we ever tell the story that all of our male family members, were, even though they were segregated or what, their service in the military, or they were required by law to, sign the civil service thing and make themselves available to war. How many were drafted or how many went? You never know that until you do that. So I have records going back to the Civil War. And so we do have one quote unquote patriot that was a Union, that helped the Union soldiers. Even when we even look at these holidays like Memorial Day,
right?
It comes out to be that we're always speaking about these type of holidays as if it's a mainstream holiday that just supports those that died in service. When in fact, African Americans are the ones that originated Memorial Day. And that's why we celebrate it so differently, because we were the ones that initially placed flowers on the Union soldiers that had been abandoned.
Wow.
Okay, so
wow.
There is not one part of the American story that can be told without telling a story of an African American or an American descendant of slave that was a part of it. And
that's so, it's so interesting. As you said that, it made me think about, my own history and how important it is. So my mom was like our resident historian before she passed away. And so she always knew so much, about both her side as well as my dad's side. And so my father was actually first generation sharecropper out of Richmond, Georgia. And so I'm so interested in finding out more about both sides, but especially because it's like, that's the generation after slavery.
Generation after slavery.
I'm like, I have to. So to your point, like us knowing our own family history is a major part of it, how we keep the conversations going. So ancestry.com. Okay.
Ancestry.com. So I'll give an example, like, marriage records, death records, military records. Those are all there. And because they're all there in full force, it gives you an insight on the things that were going on. So for instance, my grandfather, who he rode a horse all of his life, right?
Yeah.
My grandfather. Yeah, my father was a younger child, so most of my cousins like in their 70s, 75. So just give you a perspective. He was born in like 18.
Oh wow.
So something like that.
Yeah.
And so, my older cousins tell, well, Grandpa would, ride a horse. But when I started looking up his ancestry records, because it's all there, because they required every male, to sign up for the civil service, he put on there, who is your employer? Self.
Self-employed.
Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? I'm self-employed. Wow. Yeah, so, and then on the other side of the family, they were obviously laborers, and those are typically, your sharecroppers, right? So yeah. So it was, so it's interesting. So you start to build that story, and see what happens is when you start building the story of who you are from what you don't know, it gives you a sense of pride, a sense of legacy, a sense of lineage that we've never been really privy to, you know?
Yes.
So, so it's not just about your siblings, it's all those that, that makes you up. So, you really have to go back. If you go back 3, 4, 5 generations, then you're going to be able to see, that you are a part of this fabric of the American story.
Wow.
And that's the story that's not in the books. And we need to fight as hard as possible to tell stories like Black Tulsa, and, we need to fight to tell stories about that. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we all took a picture there yesterday from the family reunion. Because remember, I told you we celebrated differently. So we put flowers on everybody's graves.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So lineage is extremely important in knowing where you come from. And if a child understands at least 2, 3 generations back, that's really all they need to know and to understand. And then understand the importance of land and ownership. I mean, like true ownership. So you get away from, just trying to own a car and have a BMW when you live in an apartment. It just doesn't mix. So, if you can tie yourself to something that, that puts your family, that places your family there a couple of 3 generations, it's important to be able to do that. And if you don't have it, grow your own, but make sure that you know it. And so I have a couple of people that have been adopted, and they're, using Ancestry to, to find out their history. So, I strongly suggest that, because it's not going to just come out that, what we do. We have to tell our own story. We have to tell our kids too. And so we're at a point now that people like me and you, we can tell our story, because we have the understanding and the knowledge base and some place to start.
Yes.
But 2, 3 generations ago in Tulsa, I mean, like, we're walking side by side, sitting next to them in churches. Like, I just found out another friend of ours, his grandmother was a survivor of Black Wall Street. And so they never knew the story. We never knew the story. No one knew the story. So, yeah. So it's incredible. You're sitting side by side. But one of the things that I will say about Tulsa is that entrepreneurial spirit, whatever it was, and I didn't understand it, but now that I'm here, I understand it more so now, is that it's never left. That entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, it's kind of a little dead now, but you see businesses opening up. But when I was here, it was burgeoning. It was so many businesses here that I just really thought everyone, did that. And we, managed to have that level of self-sufficiency in the African American communities. Even as a child, I worked in Black businesses, and I very rarely worked with white people here. So everything I learned, I learned about business from Black people. We had Black home builders. We had, there's a community up here that was developed in the 70s. That was built by a Black developer. And we had restaurants and all of that. So that level of spirit, that spirit never died. It's like, you may take away the physical building, or you may take away the financial capacities of generational wealth, but you cannot take away the spirit of those that are a part of it.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, this is Benny Hill Park here.
I was just going to ask, that was going to be one of the other questions that I have for you, is how, you mentioned about the impact to generational wealth for us. And I read this book called The Color of Law that spoke very vividly about, the federal impact in racial constructions that were systematically set up. So how do we start to rebuild in that capacity? Do you think it's starting to develop our own businesses? Is it investment? And what would you say are some of the things that we can start to do to create that structure again in that system of generational wealth?
I think it's going to be important for us to, number one, start looking at self-sufficiency as a model for us. I mean, if the survivors of Greenwood are able to get reparations, that's fine. They can do that. But if we're bartering services and we're recognizing, number one, that we are valued customers, and we're also valued vendors and people that we can do business with, the self-sufficiency is really all important. What happens, such as Greenwood, remember, it was an extremely segregated area. They couldn't go to these white communities, but yet and still, these artisans were able to create crafts and to sell their wares in communities and be self-sufficient of each other. And of course, a greater part of that is that they weren't spending the money in the white communities.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, so that's it. So really, in my opinion, self-sufficiency is extremely quiet, but you also have to realize too, as you know, with the color of law, that, there's a systemic practice to maintain racism even in this country. And no matter what we do to try to normalize that and break that from the inside, it always kind of reverts back. So if we're very mindful of that, then, we'll be able to make some minimal impact over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that is, when you think about, I was just talking to somebody about SMART goals, right? And it's like, when you think about the achievable and realistic piece of the SMART goal, it's like, we can do that. We can be intentional. Like, it's not far out of our reach. It's definitely not far from the fabric that makes us who we are as Black people. It's inbred in us from a generational lineage perspective. So it is like, we can do this. We can absolutely gain self-sufficiency, even sometimes when it doesn't feel like we can. Wow.
Yeah, and we need to take those lessons even to other countries such as Africa too. Why do we value Mercedes-Benz over, the NOLA car, which is made in Nigeria? I don't know the name of it, but let's say that. What makes it more valuable to you? That it's German made and it's been we have been conditioned too, to ingrain a Eurocentric perspective as well. So it's a mindset train, and we're not going to be able to get away with it 100%. But we also have to be open to the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be Eurocentric in in perspective to be a good product or to be good. If we are conditioning ourselves to be, you know, thinking about what we can do. I'm sorry, I just got distracted. I said, if we're conditioning ourselves to understand that we can expand our mind to learn things that are better, you know, it could be a good product for us too, no matter
Right.
what. It just doesn't
Right.
have to be, you know, from this particular store or this, that, and the other. You know, the value is what we place on it based on what we are. So we have to understand, you know, these value systems and why it's important. Yeah, we just have to understand too what's important. You know, we're discussing things, and I think we're slowly breaking down some mindsets too, because you know we're expanding throughout hair, you know, understanding of hair and what's important, and that's like one of the most freeing things you can do is to get to a point where you're understanding that hair is it's extremely free, right?
Yes,
You
yes.
know,
I couldn't wait. Like, I remember cutting my hair off, and how freeing that was. And I remember deciding to lock it, you know, and I love it. And it's just embracing like the natural fabrics and content that make us up inside.
Yeah.
And then that gives you the confidence to express those same traits outside.
Exactly.
Wow. Man, I mean, oh my gosh, I just, I got chills. Like just talking to you.
Yeah, it starts with something that, you know, how do we even feel about ourselves? You know, if you go into, you know, I've seen what's happening in Nigeria too, but that's a whole other issue, you know, as to what they're doing in terms of, you know, skin bleaching and all of that. But, you know, my former husband was a Nigerian. And so he would refer to the skin tone because, you know, they don't have the concept of light skin and dark skin. They do now, but they didn't have it at first. But, you know, he would, you know, refer to a skin being dull or shiny. So the, you know, so a skin that looked healthy to them was not the color, but whether it had a shine to or a shimmer to it, which goes back to those historical things that we like in terms of lotioning and, you know, put moisture on our skin, which is definitely something that comes from Africa. So, you know, these are things that, you know, we learn over time, you know, and as we began to understand that what we feel about ourselves is not really based 100% on everyone's culture. And then the second part is the history. There is a responsibility for, you know, these companies to, I mean, you know, companies and people to really, stake, you know, allow us to stake our claim in this history.
Right.
It's so important.
We definitely have to talk about it. And I appreciate you lifting that up too, because it's true. Like it's not a difficult task for us to talk about our own histories as the catalyst for rebuilding and reconstructing our state in the American history. I heard someone say that earlier, like it's not just Black history. It's Black history for us, but it's American history. It is history.
Absolutely.
Period.
Right.
Wow. Man,
Absolutely.
I appreciate you so much. Oh my gosh.
No problem.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we're feeling this conversation right now. So this is a good thing. So
yeah,
it's a good thing to talk about it. You know, just, you know, I've been driving around the neighborhoods and, you know, looking at the good and the bad. It's a lot of bad because, you know, the 80s also brought in a lot of drugs and everything. And you've seen that people haven't really totally recovered from that.
Yep.
So, well, yeah, the whole community. It's not even just Black communities because, you know, we don't have the money. We can't spend them in the white stores either. So they're declined.
Yep. That's what my mom used to say.
They're declined as well. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate, you know, you so much. Thank you for your time, especially on this day. Thank you for just, you know, your enthusiasm about us as a Black community, and sharing this conversation with you and us representing different generations, but coming from one goal, which is to the advancement of our people. And
Right.
so I
Absolutely.
appreciate you so much. And
Oh, no problem.
oh gosh,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Well, enjoy the rest of
Yeah.
your day. Have safe travels back too.
Okay, then, absolutely. And thank you for allowing me to share my story about my hometown.
Yeah.
It's me, and I feel it, and it's just who I am. You rarely have an opportunity to do that. So thank you.
Yep.
Keep the
Thank you
platform
so much.
open. Let's keep it going.
Let's
Okay,
go.
then.
Let's
And
go.
justice for all, right?
Yes, yes, yes. For all.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. And
Okay.
I'll be talking
Thank
with you
you.
later this week then.
Okay, then we'll talk to you. Take care
All
now.
right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I just want to thank everybody so much for taking the time to review this interview. She is amazing. Just in her own right, just embracing her family lineage, the history of Black people, and taking the time to share with us. This was impromptu, wasn't planned. I reached out to who I call my fairy godmother, Patricia, and she reached out to her girlfriend and was like, hey, she wants to chat. And she said, okay, have her give me a call. And boom, there you go. So I think this is also an intricate part of our experience as Black people, as a culture, just to connect. We don't have to wait for someone to come for us. We have the answers to be self-sufficient, but to also educate ourselves within our own community. So let's continue to do that. Pray you enjoy the rest of this day and be safe as well. God bless.